12th November 1996, 3:55 p.m., the city of Shymkent in Kazakhstan, a chartered Kazakhstan Airlines aircraft took off from this city, flying towards New Delhi. Several small traders from neighboring Kyrgyzstan were on board. They were going to India to buy wool so that they could bring it back and sell it in Central Asian markets. Around the same time, in Delhi's Indira Gandhi International Airport, a Saudi Airlines flight was getting ready to take off. There were 312 passengers on the flight, of whom 231 were Indians. They were blue-collar workers on their way to Saudi Arabia to look for work so that they could earn money for their families. The Saudi Airlines flight took off from the Delhi airport. That evening, Air Traffic Controller V.K. Duda was on duty. He was communicating with both Saudi and Kazakhstan planes and was guiding them. He was the one to give clearance to the Saudi airplane to take off from the Delhi airport. A few minutes later, the pilots of the Saudi plane reported to him that the plane had reached the height of 10,000 feet. They request clearance to go up to 14,000 feet. Duda grants permission. On the other hand, the Kazakh airplane wants to land. Duda tells the Kazakh airplane to remain at the height of 15,000 feet and not to descend any further because the Saudi airplane was flying at 14,000 feet. There needs to be at least a vertical distance of 1,000 feet between two aircraft. On his screen, V.K. Duda sees the two aircraft as blinking dots. Over the next few minutes, he sees how these two blinking dots keep getting close to each other. And just like that, the two dots fused into one and then disappear altogether. This was the point when Duda realized that something terrible had happened. Around 100 kilometers from Delhi lies the small city of Charkhi Dadri. That evening, the residents of this city saw a bright flash of light in the sky. Before they could even think about what was happening, iron debris started falling on them. The two planes crashed into each other. This was the first and only mid-air collision in India and the worst air disaster in India's history.
As the search for bodies among the wreckage continued, several Muslim victims of the disaster were buried in a mass grave. Nearby, 70 funeral pyres were being prepared for Hindu cremations. Investigators have started work on the flight recorders, the so-called black boxes of both aircraft, to find out more about what happened just before the crash.
Even as a judicial inquiry ordered by the Prime Minister, Mr. Devegowda, begins its probe into the disaster, experts are looking at various theories that could have caused the tragedy.
The radar which we have today in Delhi is a primary radar, and it's a fairly old one.
To understand the depths of this story, about why it happened and how it impacted the aviation sector in India, we first need to have some basic knowledge. We'll have to understand the rules of the sky. Similar to the vehicles driven on the roads and roads built on set paths, with the road divided into traffic lanes. Similarly, there are set paths in the sky for airplanes. All aircraft need to follow these set paths. These paths are known as airways. Airways are divided into air corridors. Imagine if there was only one traffic lane on the road for all vehicles. There would be a high chance of an accident occurring. For the same reason, there are multiple corridors in the airports for the incoming airplanes and the leaving airplanes, so that there is a restricted scope of an accident taking place. Apart from this, the height at which the airplanes fly is called the flight level. According to the International Civil Aviation Organization standards, the flight level between two planes, there should be at least 1,000 feet of separation. It means that one aircraft should be, vertically, at least 1,000 away from another. Apart from this, there needs to be a 14-kilometer radius for safety. These are the basic rules of the game. And we come to the next question: who ensures that all airplanes follow the rules at all times? This is ensured by the air traffic controllers, the ATCs. The ATCs monitor the flying airplanes from the ground, their position, speed, and their altitude height. It is very important to check these so that the airplanes could be kept safe. So the next question is, how do the ATCs get this information? They get this information from the radar. Radar is a device that uses radio waves to detect objects that are at a distance from it. Radar can detect airplanes, spacecraft, and even tornadoes. But the radar used to detect airplanes can be classified into two parts: Primary radars and secondary radars. Primary radar is a system for which antennas have been placed at strategic locations all over the world. Those antennas emit radio waves, and when the radio waves return after being reflected by the aeroplanes, they calculate the distance of the plane based on the time taken by the radio wave. Primary radars can tell you the horizontal distance of an aeroplane. They can tell you the altitude of the aeroplane. Secondary radars are used to calculate the vertical distance. This is a complex bit of technology. A transponder is placed on top of an aeroplane, and the radio wave signals from the primary antennas are caught by the transponder and responds with its own signal. With this, it provides more information about the position of a flight, much more reliable information. The technology of the secondary radar is quite new. During the 1990s, when the incident took place, the secondary radar wasn't used then. The ATCs relied solely on the data from the primary radar, but the data from the primary radar wasn't as reliable. It could tell you only the approximate distance between two planes. To find out the exact altitude then, the ATCs constantly communicated with the pilots, and the pilots would inform them about the altitudes. And then the ATCS would jot down the height and speed parameters. They would use it to manually calculate and chart the flight path. Can you imagine this? In a busy airport like Delhi, where 20 to 30 flights land and take off every hour, how tedious this work would have been for the air traffic controllers. It was a stressful job. ATCs were considered to be the most stressful work in the world. On the ill-fated evening of 12th November, what were the mistakes and who made them? Mistakes that led to this deadly disaster. Two planes crashed into one another. The accidents that take place aren't because of a singular reason. Rather, multiple reasons align at the right time. Even if one of these mistakes didn't happen, this disaster might have been prevented. A series of small mistakes added up to this disaster. First of all, the Indian officials thought the Saudi airplane hadn't followed the instructions properly, that even though they were instructed to stay at 14,000 feet, the plane might have gone up to 15,000 feet and crashed with the Kazakh airplane. But when the black boxes of the planes were found, flight data recorder revealed the exact recording of the conversations between the pilots, and they found that the Saudi airplane was at 14,000 feet, and the crash between the two airplanes was at 14,000 feet. It meant that the Kazakh airplane had descended from 15,000 feet to 14,000 feet. Why? VK Duda had told the pilots of the Kazakh airplane to not descend below 15,000 feet. The audio recording from the black box showed that the pilots in the Kazakh airplane weren't even listening properly to what the ATC was saying. They were complaining to each other about the traffic in Delhi and the traffic hang-ups in Delhi airport. The second thing they found was that these Kazakh pilots didn't even understand English properly. In fact, there was a radio operator on the plane who was translating the messages from the ATC from English to Russian so that the pilots could understand. The report of the accident concluded that the instruction from the ATC was subjected to an error of understanding. The ATC told them to maintain the flight level at a certain altitude, but they misunderstood it, or they thought that the instruction was for some other flight. They misunderstood the instruction, and so they descended. After this horrific air disaster happened, the Indian officials and aviation experts all around the world learned from this. They made many significant changes to the system so that such accident wouldn't be repeated. There are now separated air corridors for the incoming and departing planes. 5 months after the Charkhi Dadri accident, the Civil Aviation Minister, CM Ibrahim, announced in the Lok Sabha that after 31st December 1998, all 30-plus-seater aircraft in India have to be compulsorily fitted with the TCS. It is basically a system that rings an alarm in the airplane if any aircraft gets closer than 1,000 feet of vertical distance. So if another aircraft approached you from below, this alarm will ring and it will tell the pilot to fly upwards. The third issue raised by this accident was the language and its nuances. When someone speaks, how well can the person listening to it understand it? It was proposed that every pilot would have a minimum level of English proficiency to help them communicate. It was debated extensively, so that there is no such accident in future, and fortunately, till now, there has been no other mid-air collision.